Good afternoon or evening, anybody. Welcome back to another weather forecast by Age from Weather Forecast. And so far, the quiet and calm United States pattern has been very enjoyable. But as we get towards the middle of next week here, things will drastically and dramatically change as the pattern will become very rough and as well just pretty active as we're watching out for a very significant and widespread snowstorm across the Rockies and as well across the Dakotas. Obviously, in developing the Rockies is going to become a widespread big snowmaker. Definitely going to watch out for some winter type weather as well. Watching out just to the south here in the plains, we're watching out for a brewing potential possibility and as well confidence in a severe weather event. So we have a lot to talk about within just all types of weather, extreme cold, extreme cold front, extreme snowstorm as well. Watching out for the brewing threat of severe weather. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So first thing I want to look at is the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook here from NOAA, and obviously we are watching out for a pretty significant pattern change in the weather right now. Kind of almost all of the United States is basically above average in temperatures as of now, and it will continue that way for I say the next maybe 2 days or so. But once we kind of get past towards really the end of this week here, we're gonna start seeing a few or pretty weaker kind of dip in the jet stream here within a trough, negative to the trough on around the 9th. That's going to push in some pretty cold there across the Rockies there and across the Pacific Northwest. But as we now later get into now around October 12th and 13th, we're going to be seeing a massive negative tilted trough. And that's going to eject even colder air and I mean a lot colder than the first trough. So we're going to be seeing some pretty consistent and frequent really cold weather across the western United States. I mean, it's going to feel like winter in some areas, specifically in towards the Rockies and Sierras, but as we're going to be watching out for almost the coldest temperatures in general across Yellowstone. We're actually watching out for a chance of seeing negative digits for the windshields at some point. I mean, we're not going to be seeing like fall type weather. We're going to go straight towards the winter type temperatures and as well overall precipitation. I mean, we're gonna be seeing basically around 30 degrees or basically 25-ish to 30 degrees below average across some of these areas across the Pacific Northwest, and consider how their averages are already cold enough, 30 degrees below that, and that's exactly what we're going to be experiencing here. So really cold there across, again, the western United States, and obviously it's going to be a pattern change because it's going to strengthen that ridge off into the Great Lakes and create a huge heat wave across the eastern United States. But that will also kind of increase the threat for that severe weather because if we continue to see these conditions temperature wise and dew points wise, if we get some pretty good thermos, kind of still across the central plains here and then across obviously portions of the Tornado Alley, we're going to be seeing some pretty good conditions with some pretty good inflow from the Gulf of Mexico and a pretty warm air still to obviously still be conducive toward development of these storms. And this huge and dramatic cold front just towards the west, it's going to be pretty dramatic and a pretty overall really good setup. So although the ridge will not be enjoyable for those kind of east of the Mississippi River, it's going to be it's going to actually increase the possibility and actually make the conditions even more favorable for that severe weather into portions of Kansas. But again, so that kind of split the United States in half. Really cold winter type weather and basically kind of early fall and even some I would say early fall type temperatures and really going to be really warm, and as well as going to start this pattern we're seeing right now as well as going to change. We're going to go from basically very wet right now across the southeast to pretty dry in just a matter of a few days. So here's now a look at obviously the Climate Prediction Center here, a map of what we're going to be seeing within the next few days within temperature wise. We're going to be seeing pretty much below temperatures across much of the western United States. You see a pretty large and extensive slight risk going all the way from basically the four corner states all the way up towards the Pacific Northwest. So we're going to be seeing an extensive kind of western United States going to be pretty cold. We do have a slight chance of much below normal temperatures from basically October 13th towards October 17th. So like I said, it's going to be pretty frequent and kind of consistent cold air throughout much of next week into the following week. As we now have a pretty high chance considering how far out it is, a moderate chance of much below average temperatures. You can kind of see now Yellowstone's included in that, the deeper Rockies, some portions of the Four Corner states as well as Sierras. We have a moderate from October 13th towards 15th. That's where we're going to be seeing that coldest air in the overnight lows. I mean, some highs won't even surpass above freezing. I mean, we're talking about winter type temperatures and winter type conditions. This will not be fall temperatures whatsoever. If we're going to be seeing fall temperatures, it's going to probably be like right on that dry line where we have that setup kind of split between the really cold air and dry air, and then the obviously severe weather threat right here. So obviously that's why we're going to be seeing such a pretty large area of pretty much below average temperatures because of this front moving quite quickly towards the east here. That's going to allow for a wide cover of this really cold air. Let's now get a look here at the 500 millibar high anomaly so you guys can see what the pattern is, what we're seeing right now, and how it's going to kind of change and defer towards the middle and end of next week here. So obviously really strong high pressure right now in place across, actually the high pressure is kind of right here. You can kind of tell that huge open area of open isobars, and that's where that strong high pressure is seeing some really warm and dry weather across southern, southeastern Canada, as well the eastern and northern United States. However, we do have a pretty weak trough here associated to some disturbed weather. We're going to be seeing, of course, the reasoning why it's going to be rather cold and wet across the southeast. It's going to be pretty weak. It's obviously stationary boundary basically. It's going to allow for some pretty cooler as well really wet weather. It's actually going to push again that kind of southeast ridge further to the north. And that's why the weather in the southeast, although it's not enjoyable, the temperatures will be enjoyable, although the actual precipitation will not be enjoyable, as it's going to basically be raining for around 3 days or so. And that's why it's going to be basically since it's such a slow mover, basically it's still there, that kind of weak trough is going to continue to bring in that rain up to the point where we get to Thursday. And that really strong high pressure now kind of moves towards really the Ontario area. And there's that first trough that starts to make its ways toward the United States. Basically as early as basically maybe around say Friday will be the day it starts to move into the United States. There it is by Friday, and there's that really weak trough. Basically, we'll be seeing that massive, gigantic low pressure, and that's going to be seeing again kind of these southwesterlies. So we're going to be seeing some pretty positive tilted vorticity. So we're going to be watching out for some small severe weather on that first trough, but again, it's going to be rather weak here. As again, the main time will be around October 11th. There it is, that really weak trough. But this isn't actually going to really change that kind of this weather pattern. You see that really strong ridge pushes far to the east here. So it's going to allow for some calmer weather temperature-wise. Not going to be as hot, and we're going to be transitioning to a more fall-type environment across the eastern United States. And it's going to allow for some pretty cooler weather. Wouldn't be dramatically cooler or colder, but it's going to be a little bit cooler and a little bit wetter. Again, we will start to see maybe a few, some slight severe weather across the plains, as well as some slight amount of snowfall across the Rockies. As this will allow still for some really small cold front there, but nothing too crazy. However, that second short wave is going to be absolutely mental. So again, we start seeing some cooler weather moving in towards the east, but not going to be dramatically cooler. Really, it's going to be kind of just say really more to the average. But this is going to be the big maker right here. This is a very impressive setup that we typically do not see whatsoever in October. I mean, we typically don't see a strong kind of negative tilted shortwave trough kind of move in this direction here and towards the traditional tornado alley until really May. This is not a very common setup whatsoever, so that's why it's so interesting. There's that really strong low pressure. I mean, it's really got a pretty strong negative tilted vorticity or negative tilted trough. I mean, you can start seeing those really strong southwesterlies there, so it's going to kind of push, obviously, some really strong amounts of shear in both the lower, mid, and as well upper levels, which would be the reason why we're watching out for some severe weather. So there you see that negative tilted trough, and then it kind of starts to become more zonal as it gets towards the actual plane itself, but really extreme. I mean, this is going to be the absolute rock hard area of cold there. I mean, look at these colors green. We're going to be seeing extremely, bone shivering temperatures across some of these areas. I mean, this is going to be transitioning from basically the 80s to basically the 20s within just less than a week here. And there's that really strong low pressure. Obviously, is going to start now moving towards the northeast, and obviously it's going to transition in towards now the tornado alley, but still really, really cold there. Now, actually, this cold area will kind of arrive towards the 13th across the Rockies, and then continue to the 14th and 15th as well. We're going to watch out for possibly a conveyor belt system, a very weird type pattern. I mean, none of this will actually, the snowstorm and severe weather pattern would not be something we typically see in October. This type of pattern we're seeing here, the snowstorm itself would actually be more of a March pattern, while the severe weather would be kind of more of a May pattern. But really, definitely, both of these factors are just not going to be whatsoever what we typically see in the so-called second season, which is obviously October in that fall time frame. But there's that really strong low pressure, basically really rock hard cold air. I mean, it's going to be basically the heart of this cold air, basically across the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado on the 14th here. That's going to be the reason why we're going to be seeing such a weird type conveyor belt system. If we see, obviously, kind of that warm conveyor belt basically right here, and then you see that cold conveyor belt basically kind of going this way, and then obviously you'll be seeing kind of that dry conveyor belt kind of coming over here. So we're going to be most likely be seeing the conveyor belt, which allow for a kind of a March type pattern for this storm. Really dramatically cold there, as well, allowing for the chance for some significant snow, and then obviously more of that severe weather basically towards the east here. But this is definitely a really strong pattern, and obviously it's definitely not really common, but this is just bone shivering itself. So you're going to be seeing extreme cold winter conditions without a doubt, and as well going to watch out for some slight severe weather across portions there, or not slight severe weather, but we're going to watch out for a potential brewing threat of severe weather across the plains. I mean, it's definitely got some pretty big potential considering the conditions, which I'll get into later in the video. But here's the actually look at the temperature anomaly. So obviously really warm temperatures all across the United States, except basically the far Pacific Northwest. But I mean, look at the Midwest here, seeing a really stubborn high pressure right now, around 18 to around 30 degrees above average, seeing 34 degrees above average across portions of southern Canada as we continue on. I mean, this warm air is going to continue to stay pretty stubborn. But obviously, as this small, very weak shortwave starts to make its way towards the United States, we're going to start seeing some more widespread cooler air across the western United States. It's going to be well-needed cold air for California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. Especially California is going to get some pretty cold temperatures, especially in the Bay Area. You're going to get around 20 degrees below average, and then here's that strong high pressure advances towards the east. That's going to push that really warm air now into the Great Lakes as we get towards around really the weekend time frame. Really stubborn heat will be moving into, again, Minnesota, it should Missouri, Iowa. It's going to continue into the weekend time frame. Like I said, that week shortwave trough in the 11th really won't be anything too crazy, but as we now get to the 12th, there we start to see the actual temperatures that they're dramatically change as early as the 12th. Going to start seeing now anywhere basically from 25 degrees below average across California. I mean, really, really widespread cold air. It's just basically further west. I mean, we're cutting off the rest of the United States basically like this. The rest is really warm, specifically the eastern United States and kind of the east coast. So you see that really strong high pressure advances into Quebec and that general vicinity. And it's going to allow for some really dry and warm air across all of the east coast. And then we see that it's a really strong short trough, obviously, that huge dip in the jet stream. Going to allow for some really dramatically cold air, basically just absolutely rushing to the United States. I mean, look at this pattern. This is a dramatic pattern difference between 36 below average, 36 degrees below average. I mean, split the United States like that. There's a huge difference. I mean, Nebraska, for example, seeing 25 degrees above average. The neighboring state seeing basically 20 degrees below average. Look at New Mexico, basically around 10 degrees below average. The following state is seeing 40 degrees below average. I mean, this is the exact reason why we're seeing such extreme dry line setup for this potential severe weather setup, as well extreme not only dew point gradients, but as well temperature gradients. I mean, we're gonna basically go from fall to dead on winter within just a few hundred miles, basically. 36 degrees below average across Utah. Oh, sorry, 36, not 46. 36 across Utah and Nevada. Wait, I just kind of... Alright, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, California. I mean, really rocking the Southwest with extremely cold air. Like I said, this is very uncommon. And as we now get into the 14th, that cold air will now start to advance its way towards further to the northeast, now into Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho, as this conveyor belt system most likely starts to move its way towards the northeast. But this is a very uncommon setup. Let's look at the real-time temperatures. Again, going to be pretty warm right now. Going to be getting into the 80s basically. For much of the Midwest, basically, you kind of see some really warm temperatures getting around, let's see here, around maybe even upper 80s, low 90s across the Dakotas by basically tomorrow. So it's going to be very, very warm, obviously, unseasonably warm. And as we now go into like the 10th and 11th, we start to see some pretty dramatic cool down now, getting highs now only basically in the 12th, only within the 70s now. So starting to see that kind of more towards normal temperatures. But look at the west, they're seeing really cold temperatures on the 12th. You're going to start seeing some temperatures into the lower 30s and as well the mid and upper 20s. And as we now get into the 13th, then things start to really, I mean, we're talking a huge difference in temperatures now getting into basically, I would say the single digits and even the teens. But look at the temperatures there for the plains. They're really good. Overnight lows. This is actually looking at, let's see, this is actually looking at 2 a.m. here. If we get later on into 13th in the actual afternoon hours, we're seeing some pretty good temperatures here as well. A pretty decent sized warm sector. You're going to see some pretty good warm and humid temperatures across. Considering it's October, we're going to be seeing actually some 90s across the Texarkana area. But I mean, this setup's not going to be too shabby whatsoever for the plains here. It's going to be more of a kind of a late evening, afternoon threat there. So for Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, just in the vicinity, basically going to watch out for some severe weather. And there's that sharp cutoff, basically. And there's the actual low pressure. You can actually tell where that low pressure is because it's a conveyor belt system. You kind of see that really weird kind of type difference within that temperature. You see that kind of inflow like that and that outflow like that. This is a weird type conveyor belt system. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of see the conditions and temperatures are still favorable in the 70s and even 80s across Tornado Alley. And then seeing obviously that really cold there, creating a pretty strong and dry island, kind of contributing toward this pretty significant amount of instability as well, even potential forcing with this event here. So we're going to watch out. Kind of all of this will kind of just be puzzling together towards two significant systems, severe weather as well as a significant snowstorm. So I actually don't have any premium on Pivotal Weather, College DePage, so I can't really give you guys a comparison with the European model, but the GFS is kind of very similar towards the CM then compared to the European here. So this is obviously the first week of negative tilted short wave trough, basically going to bring in some decent mid-level shear there across, ejecting into the plains and Tornado Alley. But this is going to be the main one. There it is right here. There's that really strong negative tilted trough. Going to be seeing some really, I mean, we're talking some really strong shear in the mid levels and even upper levels as well. Going to be seeing 110 knots there, 120 knots. I mean, this is a really strong trough. And that's why it's going to be such really a weird weird setup. There's that trough, though, kind of starts to really kind of amp up here. I mean, it's really going to amp up here. So the reasoning for it kind of amping up the way it is, it most likely will be more of a huge wind threat than a tornado threat. But obviously, seeing some really strong southwesterlies, obviously, and then they kind of just loop around like that. That's where you're seeing that really strong kind of negative tilt like that, basically like that. And it's going to kind of be more kind of meridian. It's going to be kind of meridional, but also kind of close to zonal. It's going to kind of be just kind of in between meridional and zonal, but either way, it's going to be a pretty significant severe weather setup. I mean, look at this though. This is going to be look at, let's see here, 18Z on the 13th. The early afternoon snow, seeing some really good amounts of shear across the plains. And as we now get towards, let's go back actually towards 0Z, and as well seeing a really good amount of shear still across Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and into Texas. Going to watch out for both of those regions. Like I said, the European, I don't have it here, but they are very similar. Let's actually look now at, if we look at the vorticity here, so you guys can get a look at the actual vorticity on this. But there's extreme amount of vorticity on this. I mean, look at that vorticity. It really, I mean, this is a really good and kind of representation of what a conveyor belt system would look like. There it is, kind of wrapping like that, and they see the extreme actual inflow where that actual pressure is. So this is kind of pretty good visual representation of what we're talking about here when we talk about conveyor belt systems. But again, we're gonna try to get you guys to get a better look at what I'm talking about. But yeah, there's that really strong vorticity basically right there. I mean, it's still loading right now, but look at that really tight rotation basically. and it's going to be a pretty good positive tilted vorticity as well. This system going to be seeing a lot of spin within the general area, so going to really watch out for that severe weather event as well. We're going to be seeing some good amount of vorticity both in the lower and mid, and the actually the upper levels and the mid levels. So that would be a pretty something to watch if it's directly have the dry line here. So that would be some pretty conducive if the obviously the thermos and the kinematics obviously all come together. We would definitely as well have to watch out for even some tornadoes within this event. As well, speaking of thermos, let's go ahead and look at the actual thermos. We just look at the kinematics. The kinematics are just absolutely carrying this event here. But let's look at the thermos here. And the thermos, obviously, you gotta consider we are looking at basically kind of towards mid-October, so you can't really expect too much really with this. But the thermos are actually not too shabby. Let's go towards October 13th on 18Z at 2 o'clock. We see some really good amount of actual. This is a pretty good dew point here. Seeing dew point into the mid 60s, which is actually not too shabby whatsoever considering it is October. And there is that really sharp dry line basically right there. There you see that really cold air, that really dry air as well. But there you see that really moist and warm atmosphere here as well. Seeing some pretty good amount of inflow from the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe see some dew point into the 70s as well across Texas. So actually, these dews will get pretty high, pretty far north into like Nebraska and Iowa into the 60s. So really good, but still thin, a very thin, warm sector right here. So there's basically the dry line, and then the cold front's going to basically kind of be I'd say just behind it like this, and then there's going to be the warm front basically right here. So very, very thin warm sector is going to be basically right here. There's going to be the warm sector, so you have to watch out for a very thin warm sector. So most likely considering the overall kind of fast pace of this actual low jet, most likely to be seeing kind of more of a huge wind threat and kind of gusting out. So we'll be seeing a very small time frame for possibly some surface-based supercells, but again, very far out. But overall, the thermals are actually not too shabby whatsoever. Let's actually now look at the theta E temperature here, and actually, again, we're not going to be seeing too shabby on the surface. Going to get temperatures here 344 Kelvin and to 345. Again, consider this is October. It's actually not too shabby whatsoever. Again, this is looking at 21Z, so looking at watch out for areas like this in the vicinity. I'd say that be the area to watch out. Basically from Nebraska, Kansas, maybe the far west into Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. Going to be seeing some pretty decent amount of instability here. I mean, just look. This is just obviously not. This is not bad whatsoever. You can obviously see the clear. The clear different change in direction. So we're going to be seeing a pretty strong shear and pretty strong change direction with some good advection here. So as well can be pretty good setup within this system. I mean, look at that really good instability just ahead of the dry line. Again, this is again a setup for October. So you can't really ask much more than that. I mean, it's obviously it could be better, it could be worse, but this is actually not too shabby of a setup. And let's now go look at the GFS here, then 12Z. So again, let's go all the way now. Let's go all the way towards basically October 11th and 12th. There you see a low pressure. You're going to start seeing that first shortwave trough, basically seeing some pretty significant cold air, but it's going to be pretty dry of atmosphere. So you're going to be seeing some very scattered and fluffy snow showers across the Rockies and portions of the Sierras. But as we now get into that main shortwave trough on the October 12th time frame, that's when these scattered showers will start to become a pretty large snowstorm as this moisture starts to increase here, as well as cold air will continue to deepen. So you're going to start seeing the snowstorm starting to expand a little bit more by even the 13th. There you see, there's that low pressure basically right there. That really cold air obviously behind it. It's going to allow for some really widespread snow and the heaviest precipitation just towards that low pressure across areas near not Denver, but areas obviously west of Denver into the Rockies and into areas like Cheyenne, Wyoming. And there you see that severe weather starting to amp up. But this is only 6Z, so obviously it kind of be some rain showers and scattered showers. But now by 18Z, complete different setup. There's that conveyor belt system. There you see kind of that warm conveyor belt basically kind of going up like this. And then kind of that cold conveyor belt basically kind of spreading out like that. Is going to basically how it's going to be basically like that. And obviously, we obviously have a noticeable dry conveyor belt, obviously, with that huge dry line. So it looks like a pretty good conveyor belt system. And this does not look like a October setup. This is kind of a March setup where you see those really strong, kind of really good low pressures that obviously as the plains are warming in March, start to see that really cold air still remaining in the Rockies. So we start to see conveyor belt systems kind of starting to develop, and a lot of that snow, kind of seeing blizzards across Wyoming, Montana, and Dakotas is kind of very similar setup to what we see in March. I have not seen a setup like this in October in quite a while here. Kind of a October setup. We see what we saw last year with, I believe I believe it was Bob, which was actually a blizzard when it kind of went down all the way to Texas. That's kind of more of a common October storm, but kind of seeing a storm going kind of like this is not the most common, especially when it's kind of a conveyor belt, but still seeing with a really strong low pressure at 983 millibars. So we're going to be seeing heavy flooding threats across to the east and extreme snow accumulations toward the west here. But there's that saber weather again, watching out on 21Z. And then to 0Z, it's going to be a pretty fast mover, though. And there's that snow continuing into areas like Gillette, Wyoming, into Rapid City, South Dakota, into Billings, Montana, and as we into areas like Casper and Cheyenne, of course. But let's now look at the overall accumulation of snow. I mean, this is absolutely mental. We're going to be seeing totals of basically as high as maybe 2.5 feet. So we're going to watch out. Obviously, we've seen a pretty good consistency, so watching out for some snow across Billings, even some snow accumulation, some light accumulations as far east as Denver. Watching out for some light accumulations as far south as Flagstaff, possibly. Again, it's going to be pretty rather low, kind of really low jet. So it's going to be pretty far south. So that's why we could see some precipitation going as far south as kind of the four corners. So hope you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you guys later.